Okay, I'm gonna make a video today. I'm gonna focus on the book of Esther. Esther is it's a story which I'm sure you're probably familiar with. It is a picture of the end times. We're gonna go through it. A lot of people believe that this could be foretelling the month of the rapture. And I think there's plenty of evidence that shows it could be. I'm not sure anymore. I don't know. But it is very compelling argument, and I think there's a lot of stuff and um, a lot of things that hit, I believe, in the Bible that it could be, and I think there's definitely enough here to make a video on it. I want to thank Mark again in the comments who pointed me in the right direction again towards this book of Esther in this 10th month when she is taken into the king's house. It's what goes on before she's taken into the king's house and what goes on after. I think that really, and then the where God, the sequence of the books of the Bible is so important. And what follows Esther is the book of Job, which is a picture of the tribulation period. But and I believe in I know that the Bible teaches a pre-tribulation rapture. So it all seems to fit. So I want to get into the book of Esther. We're going to go through each chapter. I'm going to not go through the whole chapter or anything, but we're trying to hit what the main points of these chapters and try and get a good timeline of the book of Esther and show you how it definitely is a picture of the end times. And this looks like it could be the rapture. But let's get into it. In the first chapter, there's certain characters in this book. I believe Esther, if she's going to be a type of the, if she's going to, she would be the type of the church in the rapture. King Ahasuerus, he would be a type of Jesus. There's Haman, and he is definitely a type of the devil when he is reigning on this earth in that tribulation period. He is definitely a type of the devil. Mordecai, I'm kind of on the fence about him. I'm not quite sure. Maybe the two witnesses, not sure. But we definitely have Jesus when he's King Ahasuerus is a type of Jesus. Haman is definitely a type of the devil. And I believe the King Esther is a type of the church in the rapture. So let's get into it. In verse number 3, we'll see King Ahasuerus says in the third year of his reign, he made a feast unto all his princes and his servants. The power of Persia and Media, the nobles and princes of his provinces, being before him. Verse 4, when he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and honor of his excellent majesty many days, even 180 days. So he's kind of having a celebration and he's showing all the princes underneath him and all his servants, and he's kind of showing them the glory and all his riches, and it's just a celebration of his kingdom. Now if we jump out down here to verses 9 through 12, we'll read these. And also Vashti the queen made a feast for the women in the royal house which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, and Abagtha, Zethar, and Carcass, the 7 chamberlains that served in the presence of Ahasuerus the king, to bring Vashti the queen before the king with the crown royal, to show the people and the princes her beauty, for she was fair to look on. But Vashti the queen refused to come to the king's commandment by his chamberlains. Therefore was the king very wroth, and his anger was burned in him. And the king said unto his wise men, which knew the times, for so was the king's manner toward all that knew law and judgment. So, if we look down here at verse 19, jump down here, and it pleased the king, let there go a royal commandment from him, and let it be written among the laws of the Persians and the Medes, that it be not altered, that Vashti come no more before the king Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal estate to another that is better than she. So right off, we see the king is humiliated by the queen. She defies his request to come before. He's obviously very proud of his bride. She's very beautiful. Vashti, her name means beauty or beautiful. And the Bible tells us she was very beautiful, but she was defiant. And she defied him, and she brought shame to the king. So he's going to seek out another queen and pretty much gives her almost the writing of divorcement. This reminds me of Jesus. The reason why is because when you think of the cross that Jesus bare, you think about his life, you think about how the Jewish nation treated him even before the cross, the disrespect. And Jesus showing through his miracles and through his wisdom and his words and his knowledge, he was showing them who he was, but yet they rejected him. Like Vashti, they defied the king. And they brought shame upon Jesus on that cross. So I think of it like that. And then Jesus had to go out and find another, the bride, the Gentiles. We are the bride of Christ. So let's go to chapter 2. If we jump all the way down here to 2:16, you're going to see in these early on, I can't go, we're going to jump around, but they make a decree. Let's read verse 3. And the king appointed officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may gather together all the fair young virgins in Shushan the palace, the house of the women, unto the custody of Hegi, the king's chamberlain, keeper of the women, and let their things be for purification be given them. So they're going around the provinces of the king, of the kingdom, and they're going to gather together all the fair young virgins, and they're going to bring them back to Shushan, the palace. Shushan is the capital of the Persian Empire, the Medo-Persian Empire, and like Jerusalem is to Israel. And we jump down here to 16. So Esther was taken unto King Ahasuerus into his house royal in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth, in the 7th year of his reign. Now, this is where people believe that this is a picture of the rapture, because we are the bride of Christ. Christ is the King of kings. And when we are raptured out, we will be married to him. We will be taken into the house of the Lord up there in the clouds. And we will forever be with the Lord. We will be married to him. Esther here is taken into the king's house in the 10th month. Remember, the king was rejected by the first queen. Jesus was rejected by the Jews. Now, the 10th month falls on December, our month, into January. Remember, the Hebrew calendar, their months overlap our months because they're like their first month starts in mid-March and goes into our April. So their 10th month starts in December, sometime in the mid December, and overlaps into January. So if this is true, it could be that maybe the rapture happens in January. I don't know. I do know this, the number 23 is very strong in the Bible, and I think God's telling us that the rapture happens in 23. So do I believe it will happen in 23? Even though we're at the very end here, I believe God always, not always, but a lot of times he makes you wait. He always does. Remember, Jesus brought the good wine at the very last. Abraham didn't have Isaac, his firstborn son, until he was 100 years old. So I mean, this it's just how it works. How God makes us wait. And right here, remember, the feast of ingathering happens at the year's end. So this is the end of the year. The ingathering, that's a picture of the harvest, God's harvest, and it starts with the first resurrection and rapture of those who are alive and remain. So here Esther enters into the king's house in the 10th month, which is the month of Tebeth. Now look what happens after she enters. Let's look at verse 17. And the king loved Esther above all the women, and she obtained grace and favor in his sight more than all the virgins, so that he set the royal crown upon her head and made her queen instead of Vashti. We have kind of replaced the We don't replace the nation of Israel. God turns back to the nation of Israel. We know this. God is not done with the nation of Israel. His covenant with them is eternal, and he will turn back, and there will be a remnant that will be saved out of that tribulation period after the two witnesses come down and witness to them for 3.5 years. But we are taken in their place because they rejected Jesus. We believed in Jesus. Remember, Jesus said, "Blessed are they who have not seen and yet believed." After the rapture, these people will have seen. They will not be the bride. We are the bride of Christ, the church. So we see Esther is favored in verse 17. Verse 18. Watch what the king does. Then the king made a great feast unto all his princes and to his servants, even Esther's feast. And he made a release to the provinces and gave gifts according to the state of the king. What happens? What happens at the rapture? If I'm just gonna look in Revelations, and I'm gonna go chapter 3. I'm just going to look at some of the gifts that God promises. These are the letters he writes to the seven churches. Chapter 3 here would be the last three churches. I'm going to just look at some of the things that he says. We're going to look at verse 5 here in Revelations chapter 3. He that overcometh, the same shall be clothed in white raiment, and I will not blot out his name out of the book of life, but I will confess his name before the Father and before his angels. He's giving us rewards. He's giving what? Gifts. We will be clothed in white raiment. Verse 12. He that overcometh, I will make a pillar in the temple of my God, and he shall go no more out, and I will write upon him the name of my God, and the name of the city of my God, which is New Jerusalem, which cometh down out of heaven from my God, and I will write upon him my new name. Look at that. We're going to have his new name written on us, the New Jerusalem. We will be a pillar in the temple of God. We shall go no more out. Look at all those promises. God's giving gifts. When do we receive these gifts? when we are married to him at the rapture. By the way, all the dead in Christ, all these people who have died and gone before us, they're still waiting to get that heavenly, that those eternal bodies, those immortal, incorruptible, eternal bodies. Their spirits are with God in heaven, but they are still waiting to receive those heavenly bodies. They're waiting for that resurrection of their bones. So there's a lot of people waiting for this. Gotta be amazing. But look at all these gifts. When do we receive the gifts? When do we receive the rewards for the works we've done? At the rapture. What happens after Esther is taken into to the king's house? Verse 18, he makes a release to the provinces and gave gifts. See? See how this all fits? It really is amazing. And by the way, there's another thing about Esther. I'm going to show you in the verse. I want to read verses 5, 6, and 7. Now in Shushan, the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjaminite, who had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captivity which had been carried away with Jeconiah, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. And he brought up Hadassah, that is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. And the maid was fair and beautiful, whom Mordecai, when her father and mother were dead, took for his own daughter. So Esther is adopted. Her mother and father have died. The Bible does not tell us how or why or what happened, but they died, and her uncle adopted her, took her as his own daughter. Kind of like the church is adopted. You will see a lot of things about this Esther that she has in common with the church. And I think God is telling us this could be, he's signifying that this is the rapture date, at least the month. But we see this Mordecai. Mordecai was a good guy. We're going to read more about him. Now, let's go to the next chapter. Chapter 3. Read verse 1. After these things did King Ahasuerus promote Haman, the son of Hammedatha, the Agagite, and advanced him and set his seat above all the princes that were with him. So we see this. He's called the Agagite because it's believed he is this is telling us that this Haman is called an Agagite, and an Agag is the name given to a king of the Amalekites. So it's believed that Haman is an Amalekite, an enemy of the Jewish people. The Amalekites were always enemies of the Jewish people. Let's look at verse 2. And all the king's servants that were in the king's gate bowed and reverenced Haman, for the king had so commanded concerning him. But Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence. Look at verse 4. Now it came to pass, when they spake daily unto him, and he hearkened not unto them, that they told Haman to see whether Mordecai's matters would stand, for he had told them that he was a Jew. See, these men are, look at verse 3. Then the king's servants, which were in the king's gate, said to Mordecai, why transgressest thou the king's commandment? The king commanded that all should bow to Haman. Mordecai, being a Jew, refused, and he told him, I cannot, because I am a Jewish man. He can only bow to God. So these evil servants of the king told Haman. They ratted him out. Sounds like Daniel in the book of Daniel, which he's. But anyway, so Mordecai refuses. Then look at verse 5. Let's read verse 5. And when Haman saw that Mordecai bowed not, nor did him reverence, he was then was Haman full of wrath. Verse 6. And he thought to scorn to lay hands on Mordecai alone, for they had showed him the people of Mordecai. Wherefore Haman sought to destroy all the Jews that were throughout all the whole kingdom of Ahasuerus, even the people of Mordecai. So Haman sees that Mordecai refuses to worship him, and Haman wants to kill Mordecai. But these kings, these wicked men, these wicked servants of the king, tell Haman that it's not just Mordecai, that all Jews will not worship him because because they have their own laws. They're only to worship God, and they will not worship Mordecai. Or not Mordecai, but Haman. They refuse to worship Haman. They cannot bow down to it. So now this Haman wants to go after all the Jews. And we look at verse 8. And Haman said unto the king Ahasuerus, there is a certain people scattered abroad and dispersed among the people in all the provinces of thy kingdom, and their laws are diverse from all people. Neither keep they the king's laws. Therefore it is not for the king's profit to suffer them. See that? This is why. The Jews have the words of God. They worship God and worship Him alone. This is what separates them. And they cannot bow the knee to Haman or even to the king Ahasuerus. They can only worship God. So Haman is full of wrath and he wants to kill these people. The pride of Haman, that these people have the audacity not to bow the knee to him. Think about the times we're living in. Think about how most of your Christian nations, your Western cultures and governments are being invaded with, inundated, flooded with Muslims and non-Christians. Why? Why is Europe being invaded? Why is Canada, United States, even Australia and New Zealand? They want to make everything about race. It's not about race. It's about getting rid of the Christians. What do we have? We have the Bible. We cannot worship the devil. This whole world is being conditioned and prepared for the reign of the Antichrist, the man of sin. And the Christians will not worship him, just like these Jews would not worship Haman. It's pretty amazing how this fits so well with the end time. Well, this Haman wants these Jewish people killed because they've got their own laws. They got God's laws, and they cannot worship him. This infuriates Haman. So he petitions the king. Let's go in verse 9. Let's read it. If it please the king, let it be written that they may be destroyed, and I will pay 10,000 talents of silver to the hands of those that have charge of the business to bring into the king's treasuries. So now Haman is promising to pay for it. If the king will give him and allow him to do this thing, he will pay for it. He hates these Jews so bad, he's gonna pay for it himself. And the king took his ring from his hand and gave it unto Haman, and the son of Haman, Datha the Agagite, the Jews' enemy. Look at that. So the king has a ring that is the It's his authority. When he gives his stamp of approval, his that signet, that's impression of that ring that makes it authentic. That is the king's seal. That ring is the king's. So when he gives that to Haman, he's given Haman the authority of the king. He's almost making him equal to the king. And he's given him his support. And he's granting him his wish and saying, yes, go ahead and do this. Verse 10, and that was you read that. Let's go verse 13. And the letters were sent by post into all the king's provinces to destroy, to kill, and cause to perish all the Jews, both young and old, little children, and women in one day, even upon the 13th day of the 12th month, which is the month Adar, and to take the spoil of them for prey. Notice it's the 13th day. What is the number of rebellion? It's the 13th verse, even. How good is God? But the 13th chapter of the book of Revelations talks about the devil and his reign. It's all about the devil. And it finishes with the beast system and how you cannot buy or sell unless you take his mark or his name or the number of the beast in your right hand or in your forehead. You cannot buy or sell. We see the beast, that's how it finishes. 13, the number of rebellion. And the day of the month, the 13th day of the 12th month, they were gonna, Haman was setting down a decree to kill all Jews in every province of the Medo-Persian Empire. And the king Ahasuerus, or forgive me for butchering that name, but King Ahasuerus gave him his authority by giving him that ring. And now we go, chapter 4, verse 1. And Mordecai perceived all that was done. Mordecai rent his clothes and put on sackcloth and ashes and went out into the midst of the city and cried with a loud and bitter cry. Remember, the Day of Atonement is a time of affliction, a time of fasting. And what happens? This happens in the tribulation period. Even the two witnesses will witness in sackcloth and ashes. Maybe Mordecai is a type of those two witnesses. So he puts on sackcloth and ashes when he hears about the plans of Haman and the decree to kill all Jews on the 13th day of the 12th month. Go down here to verse 7. And Mordecai told him of all that happened unto him, and the sum of money that Haman had promised to pay to the king's treasury for the Jews to destroy them. Haman, or Mordecai, remember, he is Esther's uncle that took over custody, and he raised Esther. He's having a back. Now Esther is the queen. Esther was chosen in chapter 2. She went into the king's, but she was chosen. So Esther is the queen now, and they're having a back and forth. And Mordecai is telling Esther he has a copy of the decree that went out, and he gave it to Esther. And they're having a back and forth. Esther is sending out her chamberlain, who the king gave her to attend to her needs, and she's communicating with Mordecai through him. And then we go down to verse 11. All the king's servants and the people of the king's provinces do now whosoever, whether man or woman, shall come into the king in the inner court, and is not called, there is one law of his to put him to death, except such to whom the king shall hold out the golden scepter, that they may live. But I have not been called to come into the king's house 30 days. She's Esther's telling Mordecai she has had no communication with the king for these 30 days. She urgently wants to talk to him and tell him what's going on, what the plans of Haman are. And by the way, Esther has hidden the fact that she's a Jew. So the king does not know that he married a Jewish woman. And she was instructed to do this by Mordecai because he thought that she might um, be prejudiced. They might be prejudiced against her because of her race. So she's hidden the fact that she's a Jew. And now this is all coming about, and she's trying to tell the king, but he hasn't requested her presence for 30 days. She hasn't seen him. And notice what she says. If a person, a man, woman, even the queen, even though she's being the queen, when he is sitting on his royal throne, if you come into the courts of the king, if you come on those grounds and you have not been summoned or called, there is one law: you can be put to death unless the king holds out his golden scepter. Kind of interesting when we go in, when we're called out of here, Jesus is going to accept us. Us. Either here. Okay, let's go. So that's where we're at. She's telling him that Mordecai. Now let's see what Mordecai says to her. Let's read verses 12 through 14. And they told Mordecai Esther's words. And Mordecai commanded to answer Esther, think not with thyself that thou shalt escape the king's house more than all the Jews. For if thou altogether holdest thy peace at this time, then shall their enlargement and deliverance arise to the Jews from another place. But thou and thy father's house shall be destroyed, and who knoweth whether thou art come to the kingdom for such a time as this? Then Esther bade them return Mordecai this answer. So right there, you see he encourages her. He tells Esther that maybe you have been put in this place. It is your destiny. Basically telling her that God has put you in here to help and to thwart what Haman's plans are, to stop them because she is the queen. But Esther, now let's look at Esther's response in verse 16. Go gather together all the Jews that are present in Shushan, and fast ye for me, and neither eat or drink 3 days, night or day, for I also and my maidens will fast likewise, and so I will go unto the king, which is not according to the law, and if I perish, I perish. So Mordecai went his way and did according to all that Esther had commanded him. So she asked for fasting and prayer amongst all the Jews. Now, Esther, okay, we'll read verse 1 in chapter 5. Now it came to pass the third day that Esther put on her royal apparel and stood on the inner courts of the king's house, over against the king's house, and the king sat upon his royal throne in the royal house, over against the gate of the house. And it was so, when the king saw Esther the queen standing in the court, that she obtained favor in his sight, and that the king held out to Esther the golden scepter that was in his hand. So Esther drew near and touched the top of the scepter. Kind of makes me think of Jesus. When we see Jesus, he'll hold out his golden scepter for us. I don't know, but it's this whole story is just amazing when you think about the end times and what's about. You know, we're about ready to be raptured out of here. This is just amazing story. Let's jump down to verse 4. And Esther answered, if it seem good unto the king, let the king and Haman come this day unto the banquet that I have prepared for him. So she gives an invitation for Haman and the king to come to a banquet. It's a banquet of wine. That's interesting too. A banquet of wine. We think about Jesus. I think about drinking wine with Jesus up there in the house of the Lord, but just amazing. I'll read verses 9 through 14, this same chapter. Then went Haman forth that day joyful and with a glad heart. But when Haman saw Mordecai in the king's gate, that he stood not up nor moved for him, he was full of indignation against Mordecai. Nevertheless, Haman refrained himself, and when he came home, he sent and called his friends and Zeresh his wife. And Haman told them of the glory of his riches and the multitude of his children and all the things wherein the king had promoted him, and how he had advanced him above the princes and servants of the king. Haman said, moreover, yea, Esther the queen did let no man come in with the king unto the banquet that she had prepared, but myself. And tomorrow I am invited unto her also with the king. Yet all this availeth me nothing, so long as I see Mordecai the Jew sitting in the king's gate. And then said Zeresh his wife, and all his friends unto him, let a gallows be made of 50 cubits high, and tomorrow speak thou unto the king Mordecai, that he be hanged thereon. Then go thou merrily with the king unto the banquet. And the thing pleased Haman, and he caused the gallows to be made. Haman has been promoted. He's given all this authority. He's rich. He's got a wife. He's got 10 kids. You'll learn that. But Mordecai, he cannot enjoy his status, his wealth, and his blessings. He can't even enjoy them because Mordecai, his hatred for Mordecai, this Jewish man, won't worship him just because he won't worship him. So now his wife and his friends have suggested to him to build gallows to hang Mordecai on, and he's got to do it. Now we'll go to the next chapter. So verse 6 and 1, we see on that night he could not sleep, the king sleep. On that night could not the king sleep, and he commanded them to bring in the book of records of the chronicle, and they were read before the king. Go 6:2. And it was found written that Mordecai had told Bigthana and Teresh, two of the king's chamberlains, the keepers of the door, who sought to lay hand on the king Ahasuerus. I believe this was in chapter 1, the end of chapter 1, where Mordecai helped save the king's life. He heard of a plot to kill the king and he exposed it, saving the king's life, but was not acknowledged or rewarded for his good deed. And now the king has opened the book of records and he's looked back on this Mordecai. I want to show you Daniel 9:10. Again, this is amazing how this compares to the end times. We go to the book of Daniel, chapter 7. I want to read verses 9 and 10. And I beheld till the thrones were cast down, and the Ancient of Days did sit, whose garment was white as snow, and the hair of his head was like the pure wool. His throne was like the fiery flame, his wheels as a burning fire, fiery flame, and his wheels as a burning fire. And a fiery stream issued and came forth from before him. Thousands ministered unto him, and 10,000 times 10,000 stood before him. The judgment was set, and the books were opened. I love that. I think of how King Ahasuerus, the book of records were opened, and he looks at Mordecai. Now watch what's going to happen. 6 through 11, verses 6 through 11. So Haman came in, and the king said unto him, what shall be done unto the man whom the king delighteth to honor? Now Haman thought in his heart To whom would the king delight to do honor more than to myself? So Haman answered the king, For the man whom the king delighteth to honor, let the royal apparel be brought which the king useth to wear, and the horse that the king rideth upon, and the crown royal which is set upon his head. And let his apparel and horse be delivered to the hand of one of the king's most noble princes, that they may array the man withal, whom the king delighteth to honor, and bring him on horseback through the street of the city, and proclaim before him, Thus shall it be done to the man whom the king delighteth to honor. Then the king said to Haman, Make haste and take the apparel and the horse, as thou hast said, and do even so to Mordecai the Jew, that sitteth in the king's gate. Let nothing fail of all that thou hast spoken. Look at that. He asked Haman how he should reward this man. And he's talking about Mordecai, but he doesn't say who it is. And Haman thinks it's going to be himself. So Haman says all these things should be done for this man. And it turns out that it's Mordecai the Jew, the man Haman despises, the man who he's having the gallows built so he can be hung upon. Read verses 12 and 13. And Mordecai came again into the king's gate, but Haman hasted to his house mourning and having his head covered. And Haman told Zeresh his wife and all his friends everything that had befallen him. Then said his wise men and Zeresh his wife unto him, If Mordecai be of the seed of the Jews, before whom thou hast begun to fall, thou shalt not prevail against him, but shalt surely fall before him. His world has been turned upside down. Things aren't looking good for Haman. Now, verse 7, chapter 7, verse 1. So the king Haman came to the banquet with Esther. Now we got the banquet that Esther has invited the king and Haman to this banquet of wine. We're going to read verses 2 and 3. And the king said unto Esther on the second day of the banquet of wine, What is thy petition, Queen Esther? And it shall be granted thee. And what is thy request? And it shall be performed, even to the half of the kingdom. And Esther the queen answered and said, If I have found favor in thy sight, O king, and if it please the king, let my life be given me at my petition, and my people at my request. Verse 4. For we are sold, I and my people, to be destroyed, to be slain, and to perish. But if we had been sold for bondman or bondwoman, I had held my tongue, although the enemy could not countervail the king's damage. She said if the decree was to make slaves of the Jewish people, she could deal with that and she wouldn't have said anything. But they're planning on destroying the Jews. Verse 6. And Esther said, The adversary, the enemy, is the wicked Haman. Then Haman was afraid before the king and the queen. Jump down to verse 10. So they hanged Haman on the gallows that he had prepared for Mordecai. Then was the king's wrath pacified. Look at this. Look what happens in the... So everything that Haman had planned for Mordecai got turned upon him. This is what's going to happen to the devil and to all the people who worship the devil in these last days. I want to show you Psalm chapter 9. I want to read verses 13 through 16. Have mercy upon me, O Lord. Consider my trouble which I suffer of them that hate me. That thou liftest me up from the gates of death, that I may show forth all thy praise in the gates of the daughter of Zion. I will rejoice in thy salvation. The heathen are sunken down in the pit. They made in the net which they hid in their own foot taken. The Lord is known by judgment which he executeth. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. Look at that. The wicked is snared in the work of his own hands. Even verse 17, the wicked shall be turned into hell, and all the nations that forget God. That is the end times. The devil and all his followers will be snared in the snare that they made. The pit that they digged will be for them, and they meant it for other people. It is going to happen. Same thing that happened to Haman here. Now we go to chapter 8, verse 1. Let's read it. On the day that the king Ahasuerus, okay, on that day did the king Ahasuerus give the house of Haman, the Jews' enemy, unto Esther the queen. And Mordecai came before the king, and Esther had told what he was unto her. And the king took off his ring which he had taken from Haman, and he gave it unto Mordecai. And Esther set Mordecai over the house of Haman. So he got everything Haman had, Mordecai got. Amazing. The devil's going to reign from Israel. He's going to reign from Jerusalem. And he's going to build it up, and it's going to be beautiful. But it's not going to last. And he's going to be destroyed, and his time is short. And all his things will be taken by the Jews and the Jewish nation. Come down here to verse 9. Chapter 8, verse 9. Then were the king's scribes called at the time in the 3rd month, that is, the month of Sivan, on the 3rd and 20th day thereof. And it was written according to all that Mordecai commanded unto the Jews, and to the lieutenants, and to the deputies, and the rulers of provinces, which are from India unto Ethiopia, 127 provinces, unto every province according to the writing thereof, and unto every people after their language, and the Jews according to their writing and according to their language. Look at this. There's a 23, by the way. On the 3 and 20th day thereof, Mordecai is writing a letter to all the provinces, commanding the Jews and lieutenants, deputies, and rulers. And he wrote in the king Ahasuerus' name, and he sealed it, wherein the king granted the Jews that they were in every city to gather themselves together and to stand for their life, and to destroy and to slay and to cause to perish all the power of the people and province that would assault them, both little ones and women, and take the spoil of them for prey. So the Jews, instead of being killed on the 13th day of the 12th month, now they turned it on their assailants. The people who were plotting to kill the Jews were killed on this day. It got reversed. Everything got turned around. Only God can do this. If we look at verse 17, and in every province and in every city, whithersoever the king's commandment and his decree came, the Jews had joy and gladness, a feast and a good day, and many of the people of the land became Jews, for fear of the Jews fell upon them. This reminds me of Zechariah chapter 8, verse 23. Read this. This is what happens in the millennial reign of Jesus. Thus saith the Lord of hosts, in those days it shall come to pass that 10 men shall take hold out of all languages and of the nations, even shall take hold of the skirt of him that is a Jew, saying, we will go with you, for we have heard that God is with you. Same thing that happened in the book of Esther is the same thing that's going to happen in the millennial reign. The Jewish nation will be the envy of the Gentiles. and they will serve the Jewish nation. Now we'll go over to chapter 9. Let's see here, chapter 9. Now in the 20th month, that is the month of Adar, on the 13th day of the same, the king's commandment and his decree drew near to put in execution in the day that the enemies of the Jews hoped to have power over them, though it was turned to the contrary, that the Jews had rule over them that hated them. Look at verse 4. For Mordecai was great in the king's house, and his fame went out throughout all the provinces. For this man, Mordecai, waxed greater and greater. Verse 17. And on the 13th day of the month of Adar, and on the 14th day of this same, rested they, and made it a day of feasting and gladness. So a day that was turned out to be evil and an annihilation of Jews, an execution of the Jewish people, turned out to be a blessing and a feast day. Go verse 25. And as the days wherein the Jews rested from their enemies, and the month which was turned unto them from sorrow unto joy, and from mourning into a good day, that they should make them days of feasting and joy, and sending portions to one another and gifts to the poor. 20, verse 20. Let's read verse 25 and 26. But when Esther came before the king, he commanded by letters that this wicked device, which he devised against the Jews, should return upon his own head, and he and his sons should be hanged on the gallows. Wherefore they called the days Purim, after the name of Pur. Therefore, all the words of this letter and all that which they had seen concerning this matter and which had come unto them. Pur means lot. Remember, they cast lots. This day is called Purim. It's celebrated by the Jewish nation in the 12th month because of this. All these things followed once Esther entered into the king's house. And remember, after she enters into the king's house, that gifts were given by the king. And before that, the king was rejected by the first queen. Reminds you of the story of Jesus. Another thing about this book of Esther is it's the 17th book in the Bible. It's followed by the book of Job. Job is the only book in the Bible with 42 chapters. Why is that significant? Because if we look over here in Revelations, we see in chapter 13, verses 4 and 5, I'll read those. And they worshiped the dragon, and he gave power unto the beast. And they worshiped the beast, saying, Who is like unto the beast? Who was able to make war with him? And there was given unto him a mouth speaking great things and blasphemies. And power was given unto him that he should continue 42 months. He reigns 42 months. Job, who is a picture of the tribulation period, the tribulation saints that come through, the remnant that gets saved. The first chapter in the book of Job, if you we'll read verses 6 through 12. Now there was a day when the sons of God came to present themselves before the Lord, and Satan came also among them. And the Lord said unto Satan, Whence comest thou? Then Satan answered the Lord and said, From going to and fro in the earth, and from walking up and down in it. And the Lord said unto Satan, Hast thou considered my servant Job, that there is none like him in the earth, a perfect man and upright one, one that feareth God and escheweth evil. And Satan answered the Lord and said, doth Job fear God for naught? This goes on until the 12th verse. And the Lord said unto Satan, behold, all that he hath is in thy power, only upon himself put not forth thy hand. So Satan went forth from the presence of the Lord. The first chapter in the book of Job, you see Satan. What happens after the rapture? The man of sin reigns, the Antichrist, who halfway through is killed. And then the beast is let out of the bottomless pit. And Satan, that old serpent, the dragon, is kicked out of heaven. And the old dragon, Satan, gives his power unto the beast that comes out of the bottomless pit. And the beast reigns for 42 months. Just like God the Father gave all power to Jesus. And that beast goes into the Antichrist, and his dead body is resurrected. It is the counterfeit resurrection because it is short lived. Jesus is resurrected that he would never die. So it's more evidence that there's something going on with Esther because the book that follows her is Job. Also, if you look in Psalms, if you look at Psalms versus Psalms 17 and 18. Let's look at the last three verses here in chapter. Let's look how Psalm 17, let's look how it ends. I want to read the last three verses. Arise, O Lord, disappoint him and cast him down. Deliver my soul from the wicked, which is thy word. From men which are thy hand, O Lord. From men of the world, which have their portion in this life, in whose belly thou fillest with the hid treasures. They are full of children, and they leave the rest of their substance to their babes. As for me, I will behold thy face in righteousness. I shall be satisfied when I awake with thy likeness. When do we awake with thy likeness? At the rapture, the first resurrection and the rapture. This is Psalm 17. And if you look at Psalm 18, I'll read verses 10 through 14. And he rode upon the cherub and did fly, yea, did fly upon the wings of the wind. And he made darkness a secret place. His pavilion round about him were dark waters and thick clouds of skies. And the brightness that was before him, his thick clouds passed, hailstones and coals of fire. And the Lord also thundered in the heavens, and the highest gave his voice, hailstones and coals of fire. Yea, he sent out his arrows and scattered them. And he shot out lightnings and discomfited them. This is the tribulation period. You compare this to the book of Revelations, you'll see it fits very nicely, and it is referencing the tribulation period here. So 18 again follows the 17 and the 18. Esther is the 17th book. We see the end of Psalm 17, we see a rapture verse. When I wake in his likeness. If you want to see another thing that's kind of crazy, and I think with the 17, you know how Isaiah has 66 chapters, and each book correlates with that. Each chapter correlates with that book, the order. The 12th chapter in Isaiah correlates with there's something that connects it to the 12th book in the Bible. So Esther is the 17th book. Let's read Esther, or let's read Isaiah chapter 17. Let's read verses 4 through 7. In that day it shall come to pass that the glory of Jacob shall be made thin, and the fatness of his flesh shall wax lean. And it shall be as when the harvestman gathereth the corn, and reapeth the ears in his arm. And it shall be as he that gathereth ears in the valley of Ephraim. Yet gleaning of grapes shall be left in it. As the shaking of an olive tree, 2 or 3 berries in the top of the uppermost bough, 4 or 5 at the outmost fruitful branches thereof, saith the Lord God of Israel. At that day shall a man look on his Maker, and his eyes shall have respect to the Holy One of Israel. There's going to come a day when Israel will respect Jesus. They will revere him. They will worship him. They will follow him. And that is the millennial reign of Jesus. Before that, there's what? There's a tribulation period that's called what? Jacob's trouble. That's Jeremiah chapter 30, verse 7. So in this 17th chapter, we see the shaking of the olive tree. The olive tree represents Israel. We've already seen this starting to happen. There's a war in Israel right now. We've already seen this, the shaking of the olive tree. And look what it says, 2 or 3 berries. That phrase right there, 2 or 3, if you just punch that into a keyword phrase for your Bible, for the King James Bible, you'll see it. There's something to this 2 or 3. It's 23. What year are we in? 23. What do we see in Esther? We see the shaking of Israel. We see a plot to kill Israel, to banish Israel, annihilate them, a genocide against Israel. But it was thwarted, and it turned out to be a blessing. It turned out to be a feast day of joy and happiness, because God can turn a curse into a blessing. Watch here, I want to show you this. This is in the tribulation period. This is the Jewish nation. I want to show you, read in Revelation chapter 12, I want to read verses 13 and 17 through 17. And when the dragon saw that he was cast into the earth, he persecuted the woman. The woman is Israel, which brought forth the man child. The man child is Jesus. And to the woman were given 2 wings of a great eagle, that she might fly into the wilderness, into her place, where she is nourished for a time and times, and half a time. It's 3.5 years. From the face of the serpent. And the serpent cast out of his mouth water as a flood after the woman, and he might cause her to be carried away of the flood. The earth helped the woman, and the earth opened her mouth and swallowed up the flood which the dragon cast out of his mouth. And the dragon was wroth with the woman, and went to make war with the remnant of her seed, which keep the commandments of God and have a testimony of Jesus Christ. A remnant of Jews will be brought through the tribulation period, and they will have the testimony of Jesus. Just like in those verses in Isaiah 17, they will look upon their Maker, and they will revere the Holy One of Israel, Jesus, their Messiah that they've been waiting for. Esther. Esther is, I think she's a great type of the church in the way you think about it. The, the definition of the name of Esther means hidden or secret. Esther is a virgin. If we look at the book of Romans, we Christians, well, let's read what the Bible says about us. Even as David also described the blessedness of the man unto whom God imputeth righteousness without works, saying, Blessed are they whose iniquities are forgiven, and whose sins are covered. Blessed is the man to whom the Lord will not impute sin. Think about how we've put on the righteousness of Jesus. We are washed in his blood. When God the Father looks at us, he sees nothing but the righteousness of Jesus. In a way, that's how you think of a virgin. When you think of a virgin, you think of wholesome, you think of purity, you think of clean, 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 wholesome, sinless. That's why another way Esther is a good type of the church. She's taken into the king's house before the persecution of the Jews starts. Now, I talked earlier about how the shaking of the olive tree has already started, which makes me feel like we're getting ready. We're getting ready to go home here. She's also the second one chosen by the king. His first wife humiliated him, defied him, just like the Jews defied Jesus and humiliated our Lord and Savior, spit on him, crucified him. And before that, they constantly were doubting him and saying he was blaspheming the name of God because he said he was the Son of God. And even after all the works that he showed them, they rejected him. They humiliated our Lord, just like Ahasuerus was humiliated by his first wife, and then he chose another one. Jesus has chosen another bride, which is us. We are the bride of Christ. The 10th month, she went into the house of the Lord of the King, which is December going into January. We'll see. I hope it is. Even if it isn't, we're so close. It's all happening so fast. The times we're living in, I feel like it can happen any day. But went a little long in this video. But hope you guys enjoyed it. See you on the next one.